Thank you all for being here today. And we got a great collaboration with Sargent and HOK. For those who don't know Kay, I had to write some stuff down. But for those who don't know Kay is a principal at HOK and a global workplace strategy leader. She has actually been collaborating with many and has been a world travel in the last few weeks. I think you've been in London twice? In Amsterdam. So like she is, when we say global, I mean global. She is a strategy designer and leader and she does a lot of change management. And the other great thing that she and HOK does is they collaborate. So this is one of the things that HOK has collaborated with us. They have shared their expertise with us, Tarkett, to talk about neurodiversity and how neurodiversity can support everybody in the space, and we can do it with flooring. So we've had this collaboration on a few things, a couple presentations. We have actually an app that after we go through this, or a link, a website, we can talk about neurodiversity. So if you want more, it'll go through all the strategies of like what neurodiversity is to how it's applied in design. The last part of it is how our products can help support. So thanks to HOK for that collaboration. We've got I think it's like a 40-minute discussion today, and and we, again, appreciate you all being here, appreciate Kay collaborating with us and HOK, and we will have a question and answer after this, so save your questions, but enjoy. Thank you.
And what she didn't tell you is I'm also the mother of 5 children, and one of them is in the audience, so I'm going to behave today. Because when they're not here, then I usually don't behave as well, but I'm going to behave because they will call me out later if I don't. So you guys, by the way, can guess, like if you can figure it out throughout this whole thing. So thank you, actually, to Tarkett. I will tell you that this whole journey for us started about 5 years ago. And we were in a meeting with a client, and the client asked us a very simple question at the end of the presentation, and I want you all to answer, or just think how you would answer this question. How do you design a workspace for someone that's ADHD? Anybody have a good answer to that? I don't think as an industry we do. And I have to tell you that as a mother of 5 and having designed a lot of higher ed and K through 12 spaces, I thought I had a pretty good idea, so I talked a little bit through it, but then I realized I didn't have a great answer. And I kind of feel like it's our responsibility to have better answers for things, because I absolutely believe in one thing that I hope every designer and all of our clients believe as well. That as a designer, I truly believe with all of my core that what we do matters. We can create amazing spaces that really help people thrive. Everybody agree with that? Okay, but then you have to acknowledge that we also have the power to do the opposite. If we don't design spaces well, we can actually sabotage people. And we don't think about that often. But we have an obligation. We really believe we have an obligation to do the right thing and to create amazing spaces. So we kind of started digging down into that question about how do you do this. And what we found is there was almost nothing out there that addressed this issue. There was a lot in Europe. And by the way, Europe is 4 or 5 years ahead of us on this path. There's a lot in Europe about how do we onboard, or how do you recruit, or how do you bring people into your organization that might be neurodiverse or ADHD or on the spectrum, et cetera. But once you get them there, how do you create spaces that actually make them thrive? There was almost zero information out there. So we started to dig in, and we dug in hard. I will tell you personally, I wrote 20,000 words after my initial research, and our team was like, yeah, we boiled it down to 6 because we don't think anybody can read this. And I'm just like, but it's what? Like, no way, right? So we've literally come out with 4 or 5 different reports afterwards, and I will tell you honestly, probably about 50% of the research that we've done on this topic has never actually been even put out, because there's only so much we can put out before it gets saturated. But Libby alluded to something that is a secret little tool. We partnered with Tarkett a few years ago because they came to us and they said, we think this is an important topic, and we want to partner to help you guys with your research and take it to the next level. Now, I'm all about that. because I actually believe that all ships rise when the tide goes up. That if I keep this as my own best-kept secret, then I'm not true and sincere in my ability to meet our obligation and to get it out there. So we believe that everything we do, we should be putting out there for as many people as possible. And we partnered with Tarkett not only to expand our reach and to help get things out a little bit faster, but we helped them create a tool. And that tool really evolved into, first it was an educational piece for their team, but then it kind of evolved to that next layer about what does this actually mean. And I'm not gonna lie, there were a lot of people within our own company that when we said we're partnering with Tarkett, a flooring manufacturer, to talk about neurodiversity, they said, what does flooring have to do with neurodiversity? Well, I'm going to tell you what it has to do, because quite frankly, we have to think about that. A lot of people that are neurodiverse have a very difficult time looking people in the eye. There's actually a great article that came out a few years ago that said Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe were both probably on the spectrum because they designed around the edges, okay? And they also probably both suffered from PTSD because they lived through wars. And so their architecture and the entire architectural movement is a reaction to their conditions and what they were dealing with, okay? So people that are neurodiverse often have a difficult time staring other people in the eye, and they tend to look down or around the edges. That means that when they're navigating through spaces, they're looking down. And and they also have vertigo issues in many, many cases and balance issues. And so if you're walking through a space and there's no clear pathways, there's no clear delineation, or the pattern is overwhelming and confusing, you can be totally short-circuiting those individuals and overwhelming them. Plus, not only that, we think about acoustics and how that can help with people and with the impact that carpet can have on having softer materials and absorption and all of that kind of stuff. So we actually thought it was a natural fit. And we've actually done a lot with Tarkett to really get that out there. So the tool, and we got to make sure that everybody knows where they can find this tool easily, not only shares all of the research that we did, but also kind of takes you step by step through different types of spaces and how you should be designing. So we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years now, and several months ago, we thought it was important that we take our research to the next level. So there's this great saying that says, nothing about us without us. And we realized that we really needed to involve individuals that were neurodiverse in the conversation more and hear directly from them what was important and what was impacting them. So we did a survey. We partnered with some folks in London, the University of London, Genius Within, and we got a bunch of responses. And I'm going to share those responses with you today, which is kind of the latest, kind of the tip of the spear of what we've been doing. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background, too, on some of the other work that we're doing. But I'm going to tell you where we are in this entire topic right now. I actually think we should change what we're talking about, because it's not even about neurodiversity anymore. We had a really interesting experience. We had about 40 people from our team take a sensory processing test. It's kind of like a personality test, and it will tell you what you're sensitive to. Now, people that are neurodiverse tend to have really extreme reactions, positively or negatively. They either need more or less of certain stimulation. But people that are neurotypical, we're affected by it just as well. We are all getting assaulted every single day. By the way, can you guys hear the construction guys above us? Right, like I'm not the only designer in the room that knows that there's construction going on in the building. You can hear that little buzzing noise, okay? We're all being assaulted every single day by all of this stuff that is coming at us. And how well we handle that or process that varies significantly. And it doesn't mean that you have to be neurodiverse. We don't have to have those extreme responses to still be negatively impacted by certain things. And so our team all learned something by going through this exercise. And I'll give you a very personal one. My test came back and told me that I need a certain amount of visual stimulation. And if you've ever been in my house, you would not be surprised. It's like, literally, it's like stuff from all over the world, all the places that I've traveled. It's like, tons and tons of stuff. But I also need everything to be very ordered, okay? And so if things aren't ordered, then I have a difficult time progressing. So again, I told you, 5 kids. I often wake up in the morning and man, there was like a party going on in my kitchen the night before, and I'm like, God, are you kidding me, right? Like, and I can't focus because it's out of sync. Like, it's a mess. And so I have to deal with that before I can then focus and concentrate. Otherwise, it's just this like stuff that's going on in me. I'm not neurodiverse, but I am impacted by my surroundings, as we all are. And pointing that out and seeing that in this result really pulled what I thought was pretty obvious, but I could go to my kids and say, clean up the kitchen the night before, or like I'm done. Like, this is it. Like, there's a scientific reason here why this really puts me off or bothers me. And we all have those things. But most of our sensory intelligence is really pretty low. Most of us don't really understand how these things are impacting us. And so when we have a better understanding of those things, we can make better decisions. Now, because a lot of people don't know, the other option is to create spaces that give people options and choices and control. And I think if there was one thing that I would say from all of our research that we've found that is really important, is that for years we've always tried to design spaces for the average person. But I defy anybody to define who that average person is today. There is no average person. And not only that, there's no average day anymore. You know, I could come in one day and just be like meaty, but I'm in a great mood. I could come in another day and it's like my football team just won, I'm in a great mood, I'm like, yeah, woo, like whatever. And the next time I'm in a bad mood and I like want to be in the back, right? We all fluctuate. We're all different. And so the only way that we can accommodate everyone out there is to create an ecosystem of spaces where people can find the right things for them. We intuitively have this in us. And by the way, I don't understand why we figure this out in restaurants, but we haven't figured this out in the workplace. Most people, when you go to a restaurant and the maitre d' says, hey, do you want to sit in this booth, or do you want to sit at the table right in the middle? You don't even flinch. Like, you're like, oh, nope, I want to sit there, right? Like, you know exactly where you want to sit. It's the same thing in the workplace. But we often haven't given people options and choices. So we instinctively, intuitively know, and when we're put in the right situations, we can all benefit. A colleague of mine has this great saying. She says, when you design for the extreme, you benefit the mean, meaning we can all benefit from what I'm going to share. So our research, even though it has been very focused around people that are neurodiverse, we believe it really is all about sensory processing and how every individual on the planet is affected by that. And by the way, after 2 years of the pandemic, we believe the entire world has a heightened sensitivity. We are all so much more aware of how close I am to somebody, how far away, what I touch, who's just sneezed in the room, you know, all of those things, right? So we all have a heightened sensitivity, and so we need to be understanding of that and create spaces where people have a little bit more control and options. So I'm going to take you through the research. By the way, if you guys don't know Leslie, who is not here today, I left this slide in because I have to give her a huge shout out. She's amazing. She's been our partner through all of this. She has really been the champion with Libby at Tarkett to get all of this pushed through. So a huge shout out to those two ladies who have really kind of been there with us the whole time. And of course our partner, Genius Within, in the UK and the University of London as well, who's done a lot of this research with us. So I have to start, by the way, and just say this. This is a messy topic, okay? And I'm going to step on some landmines, and I apologize in advance. I do not mean to be an equal opportunity offender, but I'm going to be, okay? There are camps in this world. Some people don't believe that we should be seeking a cure for autism because there's nothing wrong with me. The environment's what's wrong. Other people believe we should be. Some people like it to be referred to as neurodivergence. Others like to be called neurominorities. Other people like to be called individuals with la 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 la. There is no perfect answer. And so they always say if you've met one autistic individual, you've met one autistic individual. Now I will tell you, if we have stepped on some of these landmines, and people are like, well, we don't like it when you say we have superpowers because that puts too much pressure on us, or we don't like it when you use this term or that term. We kind of politely say our intentions are to advance this research. And it's not for the faint of heart. because quite frankly, I should have packed up my crayons and took them home a long time ago because we have stepped on some landmines. But we believe that this is an important topic and we need to forge forward. And we need to make everybody understand that we're not trying to offend anybody. We're trying to help and we're trying to bring awareness. So that's kind of the lens that we're going to go as we go forward. And if there's terminology, if anybody in this room is sensitive to that and you want me to change something, raise your hand, shout it out, and we're happy to do it. So here's the reality. 1 in 7 individuals is neurodiverse. It's not a matter of when somebody comes into your workplace. It's a matter of the people that are already there. And by the way, if you look at some of these individuals up here, not in bad company, right? The challenge is that 50% of people that are neurodiverse don't even know that they are. Because in my generation, it went grossly underdiagnosed. And in women, because women tend to be better maskers, it goes grossly underdiagnosed. And so a lot of the research we're going to find, there's a unique element to what we're going to share with you today that even has the researchers at the University of London really excited right now. People that are neurodiverse, 67% are above average intelligence. These are smart individuals. But 85 to 90% are under or underemployed. And there's a reason for that. We believe that it's the person with their conditions and the environment. When those two come together and when there isn't an alignment between those two, that's when there's a problem. Now, in our world, this is really significant. A very subtle thing happened, but it's significant because it's creeping towards us and it's going to bite us all in a minute. The World Health Organization has just changed the definition of what is a disability, okay? And so that word, disability, really is when somebody has an impairment and the environment that they're in does not support them. That means they have a disability. If I have an impairment, but I'm in an environment that is well suited and is not creating challenges, then I'm not really disabled because I can function just fine. And so the shift, as subtle as this is it's not the person anymore. The problem is the environment. Now, once that shift is made, guess who all of a sudden becomes in the bullseye? We do. The responsibility shifts to us. And we need to start thinking about this. And right now in London, the BCO is coming out with neurodiverse guidelines, and the British Standards Institute are coming out with neurodiversity guidelines. This is a massive topic in Europe right now. And so what we're going to see in the next few years are guidelines that then will become mandates, that will become standards, that will ultimately start creeping in more and more. Because in the UK, they have the UK Equalities Act, and in the US, we have the American with Disabilities Act. So if somebody were to knock on your door and say, hey, I have dyslexia, or ADHD, or early onset of Parkinson's, I need special accommodations, how many people would know what to do? Yet we are legally obligated to meet those requirements and to accommodate their needs. So what we're really trying to do in this research is to point out what those things are that we need to be doing so that we can be prepared for that. And so we really wanted to identify some of the preferences as far as the design elements, spatial elements, the things that we can do as designers that will really start making these spaces more welcoming for everybody. So in our research, we had 202 individuals that were neurodiverse respond. The interesting thing is 69% were women, and 82% were between the ages of 30 and 60. Now that doesn't seem that important, but women are the most underrepresented research group in this topic ever. So this is actually one of the first surveys that has, in studies, that has really focused a lot on what women actually need. Plus, every single one of these individuals was actually in the workplace working. They were all employed, they were all working. It wasn't just, I think I might, if I was ever in that situation. These are people that are relaying exactly what they're going through right now. And 82% being between the age of 30 and 60. Now, just as an aside, give you a little quiz here. When do you think neurodiversity is the most challenging for individuals? Do you think it's when they're under 10? Do you think it's their teenage years? Let's say their 20s, midlife, or adulthood? Anybody want to take a guess? Youngest? Okay, anybody else want to take a guess? Midlife? Anybody else want to take a guess? Because we already got the winner over here. Up? Do you think it's up? By the way, okay, so Paul, I'm gonna say you're partly right. The fastest growing neurodiverse population right now is Parkinson's. But people don't necessarily focus on Parkinson because all the research is geared towards, Susan, your group. They're all geared towards kids, right? They're not thinking about anybody else because apparently it disappears when we turn 20. But the answer is it doesn't. We just start faking it. We don't want to tell anybody, and we start to hide it. And that's what leads to burnout and all kinds of like issues and esteem issues, et cetera. It peaks for men and women in their 40s. In their 40s. And there is almost zero research that says what is impacting people when it peaks and it is at the most challenging. So this is why this study actually turned out to be pretty significant in the researcher's mind because it tapped into what we're actually seeing. Now, as designers, I have to tell you the truth. Like, some of this to me was like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. And the researchers were like, oh, this is really important. It's like, yeah, we're designers. Like, we've known this stuff for a long time. So some of this is intuitive to us, but I think it's important to put it out there. So we started with just kind of saying, what kind of spaces are you working in? And most of them were working in open environments, lower panels. A lot of them were working from home. Okay? And by the way, this is a challenge because a lot of people say the pandemic has been fabulous for people that are neurodiverse because they can work from home and they don't have to deal with stuff. But there's a whole group out there that said that's exactly the opposite of what we want. You're isolating these individuals and you're not bringing them into society, and that's not at all what we want. That's horrible, right? And there are a lot of people that actually need that additional stimulation or that guidance, and without that, they've really, really suffered, okay? So you kind of have to look at it from both of those spectrums and think about what's important and how do we go forward. Autistic individuals tend to be working remotely less than anybody else. Now, I'm going to tell you what we believe is behind some of these statistics, because as we all know, anybody that does research can be very misleading if you don't put it in context. Okay? The reason that the autistic individuals tended to show up as being more in the office than anybody else probably had more to do with more companies have targeted programs towards individuals with autism. SAP, Ernst & Young, Microsoft, all have programs where they hire individuals that are autistic because they tend to have a super focus and they tend to be able to look through codes or accounting information and find a problem really super quickly. And so they actually literally can be almost 92% more effective than their colleagues. So there's a lot of programs specifically around that. So that can be a little bit misleading just because that's the nature of what we're seeing. Women tend to be working remotely at a higher rate than men, which, if you're worried about socialization, diversity, equity, and inclusivity, those aren't good numbers, right? Because they tend to be out of sight, out of mind, tend to be more isolated. People over 60 tended to be working in their private offices in their homes more. I think that's probably one of those no-brainer ones that we kind of thought. But here's what we need to think about. People that are neurodiverse either tend to be hypersensitive or hypo-sensitive. So people that are hypersensitive, they can't take too much stimulation. They get overwhelmed, right? So they need things that are simple, more controlled, not overwhelming for them. And for most individuals, what we're going to say, if you have to err on one side, this is probably the safer side to err on. I look at a lot of these images of spaces that have been designed in Silicon Valley, and literally they're overwhelming and just like literally freak people out because it's a sensory assault on individuals, right? So we need to think about the types of environments that we're putting people in. But we also have to acknowledge that there are a lot of people that are hypo-sensitive. Anybody ever see the movie The Accountant with Ben Affleck? Like, and you're like, what is with this guy? He was hyposensitive. He needed that extra stimulation. He needed like loud music and texture, and he needed to fidget. Think about all these kids with fidget spinners, right? Like younger kids, et cetera. Men tend to be more hyposensitive. They need to move, they need to fidget, they need to engage in their spaces a lot more. And we need to address both of these spectrums. And we tend not to address this one at all, at least not intentionally. We do it maybe by accident more than anything else. And so when we think about, okay, well, what are people that are hypersensitive? What is really impacting them? It's sound. 3/4, 77% said it was sound that was impacting them, not the right level of sound. And by the way, for some individuals, things being too quiet is just as bad. Have you ever been in a space where it's totally quiet and it's eerie, like when the power goes out and it's creepy, right? It's about having the right level of sound, not no sound, okay? The next thing is visual distractions. There are a lot of people that can't handle those visual distractions. People walking by, graphics, images, all that kind of stuff. Like literally, I was sitting across from one of my colleagues the other day. She's new. My back was to the door. We're sitting in our DC office. She sits right across from me. The first hour and a half of her day, she's like, hey, hey, hey. As every single person walked in the office, I'm like, so Brett, you need to move. Like, you're not going to get anything done, because she felt obligated and she was distracted. Every time somebody walked by, she had to look up. And it was such, like, looking at all this research, it's like, you need to move, because, man, like, let's switch, right? Because I'll just ignore people when they walk in, whatever. But it's like, we need to flip this around. The other thing is, sorry, I try not to laugh when I say this one, men tend to be less sensitive to touch and smell. Okay, so they don't smell things as often. They also, their fingertips aren't as sensitive as women's. Okay, so they don't tend to have as much sensory in their fingertips as women do, typically maybe because of the size of fingers, etc. But sound and visual distractions were the big issues. And of course, autistic individuals tend to have a lower threshold for all of this too. So they tended to have real challenges when they were put in those wrong situations. And we got all kinds of great feedback about what was important. Sometimes it's smells that can just put people over the edge. Other times it's, people walking by or things in your peripheral, any of those kinds of things. Now let's talk about hyposensitive, people that need more stimulation. So what did people that needed more stimulation, what was important and impactful for them? Sound. So some people need to listen to music. They need sound. They need something that gets them going and or be in louder environments. If you guys have a choice, if you're in a hotel room and you need to work and you've got 3 or 4 hours, how many of you guys will stay in your hotel room by yourself or will go downstairs to the lobby because you just want to be around that energy of other people? I'm one of those people that's going to go down to the lobby because I need that energy, right? And I need a little bit more of that kind of stimulation. And so those things that we don't necessarily think about, but when you put it in that context, you start to realize maybe which way you start to skew a little bit. They also needed more visual stimulation. And in fact, women tended to be more sensitive to visual stimulation than acoustical stimulation. So about 10% of people get headaches from background noise, and it puts them over the edge, right? I guarantee there's 1 or 2 people in this room right now that are deeply bothered by that buzzing that is going on in the background. Truly. And other people probably didn't even notice it until I pointed it out. But now that I pointed it out, sorry, you guys are all aware of it, right? It's going to keep going. So white noise can be effective. But the challenge is that we tend to treat, again, everything like it's the same. So acousticians come in and they say, okay, let's blanket the entire environment with white noise. But we need to have social areas that are buzzy or louder, and we need to have quiet areas that don't have white noise. And actually, the best sound, if you want to put in background sound, is natural environments. Okay, so like a breeze or something like that. But it has to be appropriate to the setting. If I put a bird chirping, it will bug you because it's like, why is there a bird chirping inside this building, right? It's not instinctive where it should be. So natural soundscaping is actually the biggest thing that we really could do most effectively. But you can't put it everywhere. You can't treat every space exactly the same. Men also tended to be less aware of their movements or what were going around them or what's happening, right? They just tended not to be as sensitive to that. And of course, some people needed smells, right? Some people needed some smells. Some people needed music. Some people needed to move. Movement is huge. We were talking about this earlier. Anybody ever see Stevie Wonder? He rocks, right? You ever wonder why? Because he doesn't know that everybody else doesn't. as humans, our instinct is to move. But we all see each other, and we know that we don't just do this all day, so we've controlled ourselves and we learn to stop. But then it starts doing this, and we start fidgeting, and we start moving because we got all this energy in us, and it's got to come out. Okay, it's natural. But some people have that to extremes. And so the ability to stand, to move, to fidget, to be up and engage in spaces is absolutely critical to individuals. In fact, one of the examples that we talk about is for a lot of our clients, they put in focus rooms. Okay? And focus rooms are great because you can isolate, you can control what you're seeing, you can control what you're hearing. But then as designers, we often want to make those fun spaces, right? So what do? We put a bright color in there and some crazy wall pattern. So now you've taken somebody that can't control too much stimulation, locked them in a small box and put a crazy pattern on the wall, and you've literally just short-circuited that person. And if you take somebody that is hyposensitive and you put them in that box, they're like, oh my God, like get me out of this space, right? They need to stand, they need to engage, they need to move, but they might just need to be off to the side a little bit so they have a little bit of buffer from everybody else. So we need to think about how are we creating these situations, and a lot of our research dives into all of that and shows that. Now what we know is that 2/3 of the individuals that we talk to were doing primarily focused or concentrative and or communal work. So communal work, the best way I can describe this is it's alone together, like what we do in our studios. I am focusing on what is on my desk and what I am doing, but I can do it in a group setting because I might be like, hey Caitlin, what was that thing that I used? Or hey Katie, what was that thing that I used? Or hey Christina, what was that color that you used or whatever. Like, so you have those casual things, but you're kind of primarily doing your own thing. Okay? And so that was the primarily what individuals were doing. But we also know that it can vary from group to group. So again, I'm going to say this is one of those slides that I think is a little bit of a no-brainer, where the younger generation tended to do things more in groups, they tended to do more learning, they tended to do more socializing. The people in the 30 to 60s tended to do more contemplative stuff and individual, and the older generation spent the least amount of time doing those connections or gathering types of spaces. So if you're trying to create spaces where we want to connect people across, we have to necessarily think about some of those differences. And then, of course, we looked at what are people doing in different settings. And again, remote workers tended to have the least amount of time socializing. Okay, so again, I think that's kind of a no-brainer. But if we're talking about connecting people, we need to understand that it is actually a real thing. There's studies out there that are saying that, oh no, we're actually more connected now than we've ever been, but it tends to be much more superficial than it ever was. So I love this quote because I think this is kind of our call to arms. Indifference towards people and the reality in which they live is the only cardinal sin of design. I'm going to go back to that. We have a moral obligation to create spaces where people can be effective and efficient, not just look good, but they are effective and they can be successful and they feel like they can succeed. And so when we think about what are the challenges that people are having in spaces, sound, light, temperature. As designers, we've kind of always known that, right? Like any post-occupancy survey, those three things are at the top of the chart every time. But here's what's interesting. Now, 53% of people said the number of people that they were around and or the proximity to each other was heightened. And somebody asked me, do I think this was affected by the pandemic? Yes. Do I think this will wear off over time? Maybe to some degree, but I still think that's an important thing. You think about if you go to a restaurant, right, and you're the only people in the restaurant, that's not a good feeling. But if it's so crowded that you can't even hear the person across from you, that's not either, right? It's kind of like trying to find that Goldilocks moment. What is that right mix and the right thing that we're trying to get? Now here's the other thing that I think is interesting, and you're going to see something contradicting later. 40% of individuals found it difficult to be in spaces where they were confined or boxed in. They didn't like that. 36% found the lack of enclosure or being in open spaces were challenging. So more people had a harder time being confined than actually being in the open space. But what's fascinating to me is when we ask our clients, one of the things they always say is, oh, we want private spaces. We want our own thing. And so the question now, and this is the next level of research we're doing, is this a gut reaction of what we think we want, or is it really truly what we are experiencing and feeling? Like, are we just programmed to say, I want that, because for some other reason or some other thing? So that right there is something that we're going to be diving into. Pattern, color, texture, all of those things were important when we dive into this. And by the way, I'll give anybody that wants a copy of this presentation, so I'll happy to share that. What we found is that men tended to be, have a slightly higher sensitivity level to men in the survey. Men tended to have the lowest. What was really interesting is people that identified as being non-binary spiked really high and had a lot of sensitivities. And so that was something that had never actually really been considered, but we asked that in our survey, and so now the researchers at University of London are kind of taking that and running with it, because they're like, we got to understand more about that one, because that was one of the biggest surprises out of this entire thing, is that non-binary people tended to have the highest sensitivity level of anybody. So where do you start? There are 1,000 things that you could do, but I'm going to tell you that right now, there are some very simple things that we all can do to create spaces that make people that are neurodiverse and anybody who is dealing with sensory stimulation, which is every single person on the planet, more comfortable in spaces. So the first thing is when we give people options and choices about where they can sit and they have some control, then they can instinctively find the right spaces. We need to create spaces for people to move, to either physically engage with the space, to walk, to move, to engage, or to be able to have that choice to go someplace else. Some people need a dedicated space. There are some individuals that routine is absolutely critical. And quite frankly, most of us are creatures of habit. In fact, one of the arguments that I get all the time, and I had this great argument with one of our clients, Microsoft had all of their spaces activity-based working. And what they noticed over a period of time is that people naturally gravitated to the same spots. And so they said, well, why are we doing this? Because people are just navigating to the same spot, just assign them a spot anyway. But I said, but the thing is, they chose the space that was the most effective for them. They still had a choice and a decision and got to find that. And once they found that, yes, then they tended to go in those same spaces, but they still were better off than just randomly being assigned some space where they had no control. So they went back to making it unassigned, free choice, but they did find that people tended to gravitate towards those same spaces. Access to natural daylight, low traffic areas, quiet rooms, spaces to retreat, lighting. Lighting is a big one. A lot of people get headaches from different lights. Flickering can really be distracting. If you have any sensitivity at all, light is typically the second biggest thing that people have that sensitivity to. And so having some control over that, areas for dark, areas that are brighter, is really important. Introducing natural elements and adjustable or ergonomic furniture that people can kind of sit, stand, perch, do whatever. And then, of course, we also put in some operational things, and we put in some individual adjustments. We are not HR experts, but I will say that if all you do is address the space and you don't address operations and or give people some choices and control, then you're not addressing the problem holistically. And that's just what our challenge was, is that all these people that are addressing it solely from an operational standpoint, that's great. You're welcoming people into your environment, but then they don't stay because the environment isn't well suited for them. Right? And so we need to kind of really think about all three of those elements. And then we just kind of go through and say, what are some of those most important things? Choice, quiet, daylight, zoning, making sure we have different types of zoning, different levels of zoning, movement, controls, adjustments. Those are the things that are empowering individuals to have some sense of control or options or choices so that they can find the spaces that are well suited for them. So I just wanted to throw up this too. There's a bunch of terminology. I talked earlier about stepping on some of those landmines. And I wanted again to thank Leslie and Libby for all of their support in all of this work. But that's our research. That's the latest research that we just found. And I think what we are finding is that the more we can apply this with our clients, there's a science to what we do. And when we apply that science and we're justifying the decisions, then everybody feels better about the decisions that we're making because it is rooted in something solid. And they can understand the benefits of that and why we're making the suggestions that we do. So With that, I wanted to see if there's any questions. Everybody's feet starting to feel a little bit better? Yay? Nay? Yes? Yeah? Well, isn't it fabulous that we have Susan here? So I will say that we actually approached them probably 3 or 4 years ago, before the pandemic, and had started down a conversation on that topic because, I'll be brutally honest, we're an architectural firm. We don't want to come up with a checklist or guidelines or standards. Like, we want to give advice, we want to put it out there, but that's not our preview. Okay, so we're actually hoping that somebody does pick this up and run with it. And so we had approached IWBI to do that. Then the pandemic hit. And the pandemic took everybody into a totally different direction, and it was all about immediate safety and cleanliness and, you know, all of those things. They are working on the mind. There's a task force about mind, and there's a task force about health equity, and they touch on those topics. I'm probably the worst person to ask this question to because I am highly jaded. I have read those, the British Standards Institute guidelines, and I think they literally are barely scratching at the surface. Barely scratching at the surface. There is so much that we know that we should be applying and we're not. And we need to get deeper and do a better job. But it'll come. Yeah. Yeah, it is important, and I think a lot of it, again, you know, I mean, I think the challenge is that, you know, and here's the other thing I think is a challenge too. We're working with a lot of our clients right now to take some of this stuff and to bake it into their guidelines and standards. Because when you're dealing with millions of square feet of space, as you guys know, and you're trying to roll this out, it's really, really hard. And you have to have some kind of standardization, and you tend to try to get it to the average, okay? But I've never had a client come to me and says, you know what, we just want to be average. Like, that's perfectly good with us. So we're going to pay you all this money just to be average, right? I think we can be doing more. And so we're working with a lot of our clients to take a lot of this stuff and to think about their kit of parts and their elements in their guidelines and the 6 modalities of work and spatial sequencing and all of those things. And for many of our clients now, we overlay this and say, are you getting all the modalities of work in? Are you creating a hypo and a hyper version? Are you sequencing this? So, and I'll give you just an example of this. We believe there are 6 modalities of work. One of them is social spaces. One of them is focus. As designers, okay, let's put in more gathering spaces. So let's take those gathering spaces and just plop them right in the middle of where people are trying to work, and then we wonder why nobody uses them, or there's a conflict, or it's too loud. Okay, because we didn't think about how we sequence this, and that's really, really critical. And so our teams literally are starting to put that lens on all of our projects, and it's a total game changer when we start looking at this. And the other thing that's, quite frankly, is a massive game changer is when our clients can understand the logic behind the suggestions we're making. It takes the subjectivity out of it. Like, literally, we don't get this, I don't know if I like it, right? You know, sorry to say this, I don't care what you like. That's why you have a house. Go do what you like at your house. You're hiring me to do what works for your business. Okay, and I'm going to tell you, if you're trying to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusivity goals, if you're trying to get people to come back and have an effective work environment that they want to be in, then these are the things that you need to consider to create the right solutions. And I think our clients are looking for those answers today, and I think we have an obligation. I actually am, I'm sorry, I'm going to get up on my bandwagon, or on my soapbox for a minute. I believe the entire world right now, 37 years as a practicing designer, we have never had this much attention on work, the workplace, or the workforce. Never. If there was a year we had an article in the Wall Street Journal, hallelujah, that was a banner year. Now it's every day. The entire world is looking at us for answers. And we're playing dumb. We're acting like we don't know, right? Asking the workforce what they want is like asking somebody who's never been to a restaurant before what their favorite dish at that restaurant is. But we've all eaten in this restaurant 100 times. We've worked with clients that have done this. We work with clients that have been doing hybrid work for 10 years. We've worked with clients that have had mobility programs for 20 years. We know what works. We know what doesn't. We know what impacts people and why. Apply the logic and the science and help lead our clients to the right solutions. Let's stop asking people who have no idea which end is up what they think, because we're getting responses from the end users that are just emotional responses, and they're not necessarily thinking more holistically. And I think if there was ever a time that we needed to lead with science and our expertise, but also have empathy, that not everybody's going to adjust at the same point, now is that time. And we have to create better work environments, because if we don't, we're just going to be in this endless cycle. So I'll step back off my soapbox for a minute. Any other questions or thoughts on our research or what we're doing? Everybody good? All right. Well, thank you guys very much for coming in and listening to our research.
All right. I will lead some people around if you want to see some examples of hyper and hyposensitivity here. You need your phones because we got QR codes. This will lead you right to the tool that Kay and HOK and our team, huge team behind this, by the way. Kay is like, you know, the talking head and doing all this great stuff, but so appreciate your time here today.
Yeah.
And the tool is pretty amazing. Like I said, it takes you through steps. So you don't have to know it all. And then there's cheat sheets in there too. So if you are presenting to a client and you're going to be asking those questions like you do in programming, these are a few more to add to that. All right, so if you want to see that, again, grab your phone. You'll see QR codes, like there's one on that workstation over there. And it'll show you, okay, if I stand here, this is what the environment might look like if you are hypersensitive and you needed this time. You know, these are things to do. Now, we didn't apply it here because we're a showroom, we're a gallery, we wanted it kind of quiet. But don't think we might not add to it, especially more planting and stuff like that. But so there's 4 spots. I'll show you those spots, and I can talk you through that. But thank you guys all for coming. Great audience. And have fun design days, as we call it here, in Fulton Market and Neocon. Thanks.